Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to join you all today for this great virtual event. These gatherings are even more important now that we are restricted from gathering in person. Before I get started, I just wanted to shine a spotlight on the group of individuals you see on the screen. This is ACT's 2020 class of the Impact Leadership Program, which gathered at Walt Disney World in early February for a 3-day leadership retreat. This is a wonderful group of young and emerging professionals that we can all look forward to achieving some great things in the future. If you know one of them, be sure to reach out and congratulate them for being a part of this program. ACT is the premier association for TDM professionals. Our goal is to build a strong community of individuals and organizations working to advance and implement TDM at their work sites and within their communities. ACT is your organization for the latest information and best practices in TDM. As the largest network of TDM professionals, bringing together over 1,100 of your colleagues and peers from across the United States, Canada, and in countries around the world, ACT provides you valuable professional development opportunities with dozens of virtual, and when the coronavirus permits, in-person events a year, providing you with learning and networking. ACT supports your growth as a professional from the moment you enter the field until the day you retire through mentoring, leadership development, and our soon to launch professional certification via the TBMCP exam. And ACT works to advance the entire TDM industry through advocacy and influence of federal, state, and local policy supportive of TDM. I'll take the next few minutes to provide more in-depth on these efforts. ACT's policy objectives are focused on the following cornerstones. First and foremost, commuters. Transportation policy should focus on creating a multimodal system that moves people while delivering benefits of reduced congestion, improved air quality, and stimulating economic activity. ACT supports policies that encourage investments in new technologies and removes hurdles preventing new practices. Next, across the nation, employers, transportation management associations, and both public and private sector mobility service providers are taking an active role improving the nation's transportation system. ACT supports policies that include all stakeholders in the planning and delivery of transportation solutions. Lastly, performance. Especially today, we must focus on the most efficient use of our transportation, of our limited resources, which requires a shift in the way decisions are made and which programs and projects are funded. ACT supports policies that compel decision makers to find the best solutions that focus on creating efficiencies within our transportation system, and this is core to TDM. With all this in mind, ACT has been working the past year to develop the MORE Through TDM Act, which will become the first major piece of legislation focused on raising the profile and use of TDM within federal transportation policy. Why is this legislation needed? We've struggled for years and decades to gain traction for TDM. So it's now time that as an industry, we focus our efforts to include TDM as a go-to strategy within federal policy. Currently, TDM appears nowhere within the FAST Act. Eligible TDM strategies vary by region, depending on how states and federal highway staff interpret the use of CMAQ and other resources to support TDM program. There's no dedicated funding for TDM strategies, which means TDM often competes for limited funding within a broader set of objectives. And finally, ACT believes it's time for greater federal support of TDM strategies to expand the efficiencies of our transportation system. The MORE Through TDM Act will do several things. First, it defines TDM. Working with ACT's Public Policy Committee, along with feedback from congressional staff, we have introduced this definition of TDM within the legislation. Getting a definition for TDM included within the federal code would be a great victory for the industry, as it would provide clear direction to USDOT about the role and need for TDM. The legislation also sets out definitions for TDM strategy, making it clear that behavior change, marketing incentives, and technology strategies are eligible projects within TDM and should be supported with federal funding. The legislation defines transportation management associations and includes them as eligible recipients for funding, in addition to regional commuter programs and technology providers. The bill includes requirements for including TDM within long-range transportation plans, making it clear that all regions and non-attainment areas must look at the role of TDM strategies within their efforts to reduce congestion and improve air quality. Finally, the current legislation or the current language supports the establishment of a new UTC research program on TDM. Most significantly, the MORE Through TDM Act establishes a new TDM program. The bill calls for $100 million a year for 5 years. Funding would be available to all states that have developed TDM plans and go towards the funding of TDM projects. Funding would be apportioned using the same calculation used for CMAQ funds. So whatever percentage of CMAQ your state receives, they would receive the similar percentage of this program. Eligible projects include the broad mix of themes you see on the screen and whose outcomes meet the goals established within TDM to reduce congestion, improve air quality while moving people. For the first time, the MORE Through TDM Act would clearly make marketing and promotion eligible projects through federal highway. In addition, the MORE Through TDM Act would expand the list of traditional eligible entities to clearly lay out that TDM service providers, TDM associations, and TMAs, TMOs would be eligible for applying for and receiving funds through the TDM program. This would be a major victory for many of our members that have long struggled to be direct recipients of federal highway funding. The MORE Through TDM Act would also establish a state and national advisory committees to support that third cornerstone of collaboration. Successful TDM has always required strong public-private partnerships, and to ensure this is taking place, the legislation would require these advisory committees to be established. At the state level, the committees would bring together transportation agencies along with the private sector employers and nonprofits to oversee the development of statewide TDM plans and their implementation. At the federal level, the committees would also bring together a cross-section of government agencies, major employers, and associations. The committee would be housed under the Federal Highway Administrator and work on issues related to ensuring the use of TDM strategies in everything from transportation planning to disaster preparedness and resiliency. So just a few weeks prior to the onslaught of COVID-19 in the United States, Representative Lipinski, the bill's original sponsor, sent the legislation to all members of the House with a Dear Colleague letter seeking support as co-sponsors of the legislation. Great timing. We were able to secure a couple of co-sponsors before Congress had to shift its focus to COVID response and economic stimulus. So this has set us back a bit, but this also presents an important opportunity for the industry to demonstrate how important the work we do is to ensuring businesses remain operational during major events like this through TDM strategies like telework, and how necessary it will be for strong TDM programs to be in place when the virus subsides and we need to get millions of people back to work, and how developing and promoting a balanced transportation system that uses biking, walking, carpools, van pools, and public transit will require significant support from the federal government. So I ask that all of you take a moment to learn more about the MORE Through TDM Act on our website and ask your reps to sign on as co-sponsors. In addition, we are working to incorporate the bill's language into the next transportation authorization bill. As many of you know, the current legislation expires at the end of September. We are working closely with the House T&I staff and Senate EPW staff to identify opportunities to incorporate aspects of MORE through TDM. And even getting something as simple as the definition of TDM included would be a huge win for our entire industry. We have also been working with the House Special Committee on Climate to incorporate TDM as part of their report, recommending strategies for the United States to successfully address the risks associated with climate change. So there are many opportunities for us all to influence federal support for TDM. And I simply ask that you look for opportunities locally and nationally to voice your support. Before I conclude, I also wanted to give a quick update on TBMCP, the industry's first ever professional certification program. For the past 3 years, ACT has been working to develop this exciting new program that will, for the first time, start to establish nationally recognized standards for what it means to be a TDM professional. Many dozens of volunteers have spent countless hours developing the program structure, writing and reviewing questions, and in February, taking the first beta exam. We had initially planned to launch our first public exam in June of this year, but have decided with everything going on, it would be best to push that back a few months, and are currently targeting the second half of September for the exam window. I encourage you all to visit ACT's website, where you can download a copy of the Candidate's Handbook, which provides information on the exam, its major domain areas, and a list of resources recommended to study and review in preparation for the exam. We look forward to announcing and welcoming our first class of TDMCP recipients at the TDM Forum in Atlanta this November. I appreciate the time to speak with all of you today and look forward to seeing you in person at a future ACT event in Denver, Atlanta, or if we have to, online. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And we do actually have a couple of questions here if you've got a minute to take a couple of those.
Happy to.
Great. The first comes from Zia, username Zia, and Zia would like to know some areas aren't necessarily eligible for CMAQ funding. Would those areas be available for funding? I know you mentioned CMAQ as a kind of a model for funding for the MORE with TDM Act. Could you say a little bit more about how that might be envisioned?
So right now, the program structure is one that utilizes the CMAQ funding formula to determine how much each state would receive through the CMAQ program. It doesn't necessarily mean that your area would be, if your specific area within a state does not receive CMAQ dollars, this would not prohibit you from receiving those dollars as long as your state is receiving funds through the TDM program. Essentially, if you're in an entertainment area, you'd still be able to utilize those dollars.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
Yeah, so I've got another question here from Sharon. Sharon would like to know, what are your thoughts on how free transit relates to TDM and how free transit can effectively and innovatively impact TDM for transit services based on capacity, demand, and so on?
Yep. It's a good question and a timely question. There's a lot of discussion going on around the country right now, as I'm sure folks are aware of, about the potential that free transit can play within a overall transportation TDM strategy. It's one that I think is important for communities to be looking at as an opportunity, maybe not perhaps for their entire systems, but portions of their systems. And we see more regions starting to investigate, the role that free transit may play within their services. And ACT is actually going to be hosting a panel discussion at our Emerging Mobility Summit, our virtual summit for that event at the end of April. That's going to dive directly into the conversation around how should communities be looking at fare free transit as a part of their overall strategy. So good timing, and I hope everyone joins us for our Emerging Mobility Virtual Summit on April 28th.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to present this with us today, David. It's always great to hear what ACT is up to and how you're working on behalf of all of us on the national level to keep things moving in a TDM direction. So thanks for the work that you do. Thanks for being a part and a sponsor of CommuteCon. And we look forward to crossing paths with you at the other upcoming ACT events throughout the year.
Definitely, and thank you so much to all of you at Ride Amigos for hosting this really important event. It's wonderful to see almost 1,000 people on a call talking about TDM. So it's a great service to the entire industry. So thank you.